Well, hello, thank you for joining me today again on the Church History Trail. You're very welcome to the programme. And there's a wee clip in here I want to show you. It's Brookside congregation, founded in 1774. And gives a bit of the history there. So if you want to pause the video there, you can do that and have a read of that. And then it's Reverend J. Matthews, minister of Brookside Presbyterian Church, a Hackle outside his church. So we're going to go in here and we're going to talk to the minister, and he's going to give us a wee bit more information. Hello, William.
Hello, Mark. Good to see you again.
God bless you.
Aye.
So you have a wee bit of information here for us you want to give us.
Okay, well, that's obviously myself, which I mentioned before. And then this is the Reverend David McCLURG.
So just one thing before you move on with yourself there. I actually said September 2018, but it's not. It's 2008 you've been here from.
Yeah, 18 years from here now.
Yes.
18 years. So that's myself. And then the Reverend David McCLURG. He was the assistant in Emmanuel Presbyterian Church in Belfast. And then he came here in 1997 to 2007. He's now the minister of Newton, Crumlin and Carnlough Presbyterian churches. The Reverend Ivan McKay, who was before him, who was over here over 24 years, from 72 to 96. He left to go to be minister at Dundonald. He was one of the moderators of the General Assembly.
Oh, was I?
He was indeed.
And so that only lasts for a year, doesn't it?
That was a year. So he was a year as a moderator. And then his predecessor was the Reverend James or Jim Matthews. He was also became moderator of the General Assembly as well. He was here for 10 years and he left to go to First Lurgan Presbyterian Church, is where he went to after that. The Reverend James Macaulay, he was before that. He was relatively short ministry in his time. And that's so an interesting thing in his time, reading the Kirk Session Minute books, the local Orange Order asked for permission to have a gunpowder plot service at that time. So
a what?
A gunpowder plot
I
service.
hope nobody was hurt.
So it's obviously remembering the Guy Fawkes and that. So
yeah.
They had a service. So he was here in the 1950s.
Excellent.
And so the Reverend Alexander Gilmore Kirkpatrick, we've mentioned before, was here for 20 years indeed. And
he was crippled with arthritis.
Arthritis, which is touching for me. I have arthritis too, so but he was a faithful minister. And then the Reverend David McConnell became before that, and he was the one that was killed in the accident with a bicycle in his 50s. He was. And then going back before that, now I never know how to pronounce this one. The Reverend.
I got stuck on that as well. I think
McGay. I think something like McGay or something. Depends if the GH is silent or not. He had a very short ministry towards the end of the war, First World War.
Oh, is that right?
And then he came here. And then preceded by the Reverend Thomas George Moore, another short ministry. And the Reverend Moore left here to go to be minister in Trinity in Liverpool, the minister there. And then going up above, the Reverend Robert Hugh Wilson in the early 1900s. His time, a new manse was built. The land was purchased for £250, and that so in his ministry also the church building was renovated. Reverend Robert Mitchell, we've mentioned before, long ministry over 40 years, came the year of the revival. And then before him, the Reverend James McCLURG ABERNETHY. He was here just for a year. He left in April 1859, just before the revival hit this area. Went to the colonial mission to Australia. I love that picture of him. I think it's expecting to be seen beside Ned Kelly, that sort of picture.
He looks like a Quaker or something.
So he had quite a long ministry out in Australia after that time as well.
Actually, an interesting thing about the sideburns there. The origin of the sideburns it actually comes from the American Civil War.
Right.
There was a general in the American Civil War who had sideburns, big thick sideburns. And he was called General Burnside. Right. So guess what? They reversed the name, Sideburns, and it stuck.
Very good. Before him, the Reverend Stuart Fullerton. We do have a picture of him. Sad story. He was released from being minister, and a year after he was released, or still a relatively young man, I think in his 40s, he died in the workhouse in Dungannon. a short time after that, his wife was drowned too.
My goodness.
So it's a very tragic story in that. Prior to him was the Reverend John Marr, we've mentioned before, the longest serving minister and the first minister probably of this congregation by itself. He was here for 43 years as ministry. And then Thomas Smith, the one who was involved in United Irishmen.
He would be the most colourful, I would say.
He was. He's described in some of the documents as a man of small in stature, but with a fiery temper and strong conviction. And that he was very influential in America. He went to Pennsylvania and was very involved in the Presbyterian Church over there and had a long ministry over there in Pennsylvania. I think one of the congregations he was actually minister was called Fermanagh. That's so.
That's right, it was. That's right.
And then prior to him, the Reverend William Holmes. Now, the Reverend William Holmes, he was ordained as minister here in 1775 and the first minister here. I think in reality, he was based at Ballyeaston.
That's not the man who's out in the clipping, is it? No?
Yes, he maybe is mentioned.
I think that's him. It's in the clipping.
Now, he was the minister in Ballyeaston and near McCLURG there. Some of the old records, he wasn't getting enough pay, so he took on other congregations as well. Gardenmore in Larne was one of the congregations, and Island McGee. These were all secession churches. And then Randallstown, which is now second Randallstown, and Brookside were together, or Brookside would have been together. It seems to be he seemed to have more a supervising role, and there was others who ministered along beside him. But he had a big influence in East Antrim, and so he was one of the early secession ministers who came from the split within the
So
Church
could you explain just very briefly what secession means in Presbyterianism?
Yeah.
Just for the viewers.
Well, in the Church of Scotland, one of the things which caused controversy in the Church of Scotland was called patronage. That was the situation where wealthy landowners could appoint basically the minister, and some within the Church of Scotland didn't agree with this, and initially there was only I think 3 or 4 ministers split away. Now there was also differences. They feared the Church of Scotland was becoming more liberal in its view on the Bible and on salvation. But when they split away, the secession churches really grew quite considerably within Scotland, and then they came over to Ulster at that time, and they quickly developed. I think there had been seceders, as they were called, from the 1750s in the Ochil area, would have been supplied from the ministries from the Temple Patrick area, Lyle Hill, and then the congregations were formed here in the 1770s.
And concerning Brookside itself, there is 2 histories, or 2 versions of history. Could you give us very briefly, and we'll wrap the wee video up, the 2 versions if you can?
Very quickly. The secession church is divided in 2 between what are called the burghers and anti-burghers.
Nothing to do with McDonald's, of course.
Nothing to do with McDonald's. It was to do with an oath, which indeed would be, if you were a merchant, you generally had to belong to a guild. This is in Scotland. And to be part of this guild, you had to swear allegiance to the true religion of the land. Now, some within the secession church were happy to do that, because they believed the true religion they were swearing allegiance to was what of the secession church.
Yes.
And they were called burghers. They were happy to do it. Others were not happy because they felt it was swearing allegiance to the Church of Scotland. They were called anti-burghers. So one history is that Trinity was a congregation formed in the village here by the anti-burghers, and then Brookside was a congregation formed by the burghers after that. But from what we have read, and some of the records seem to show, is that there was an anti-burgher congregation formed here in the 1770s on this site. This site was called Mags Now. Some of the folk in the congregation here remember there was a well in the church grounds here called Maggie's Well.
Yes.
And some folk remember going out of Sunday school to get a drink from Maggie's Well before going into the church.
Brilliant.
So it's believed that the congregation was formed here in the 1770s, and then it was divided over a call to the Reverend Carmichael in just before the late 1700s. And 2 of the elders and half the congregation left, and they formed what today is Trinity Congregation. 2 of the elders and half the congregation remained to form a third of Ochil, then became Brookside in 1901. 09.
Well, I would have to say, William, I think if it came down for me, whether I would be a burger or an anti-burger, I think I would have to be a burger, but especially if it had cheese on it. So just quickly, could you give a wee plug for your own church and your services?
Our services here at 11:30 on Sunday morning. We have 3 Presbyterians churches in the village, and so in the evening service we unite and go round to 3, 6:15 on a Sunday evening. Some people think it's a strange time to have an evening service. It's supposed to do with a bus that used to come from Ballymena, but nobody remembers the bus, so we still have our service 6:15. So we have a good relationship between the 3 churches, and we unite in the evening. So 11:30 in the morning, 6:15 in the evening.
Brilliant. William, thanks very much.
Here.
I've been
Very welcome, Mark.
enjoyed the fellowship here and absolutely the history as well. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you and God bless.